You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% Podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
Welcome to today's episode of the 1% Podcast, the show where we interview young adults who are battling or surviving an unexpected cancer diagnosis. You are not alone, and I promise, by consuming today's content, your soul will be fed with the hope, courage, and inspiration you need to keep fighting for today. I'm excited to be on your journey with you today. If you haven't done so already, be sure to head over to 1percentpodcast.com to sign up for our email list to see the latest news and updates for all our guests on the show. You can also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1% Podcast. If you want to join in on some of our discussions, please join our Facebook group, the 1% Podcast. To contact me directly for content, questions, or booking events, you can email me at info@1percentpodcast.com. This is episode 43 of the 1% Podcast, and today my guest is Mr. Brian Kudler. Brian and I have a very serious, in-depth conversation about what it's like to be on palliative care, knowing that your time may be coming soon, and how you want to live the rest of your life. Today's story, honestly, is a subject that a lot of people don't talk about. That's why I wanted to have Brian on the show, so you could hear firsthand what it's like for someone going through the final moments of their life and not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but really just getting through the day-to-day. So today's episode may be a little tough for some people to listen to, but I'm just so thankful Brian had the courage to share exactly what it's like to go through palliative care. But before we get into Brian's story, I want to go over today's 1% moment of truth. Today's 1% moment of truth is about the path to forgiveness. Forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a constant attitude. And forgiveness does not mean you excuse the crime, it just means you're no longer willing to be the victim. Just like all of you, I can think of countless times where I've had to choose the path of forgiveness. And when I say choose, I really mean I had to make the intentional choice to choose to forgive someone. But not only did I have to forgive someone else, I had to make that choice to forgive myself as well. And I'll give you a personal example. So in my life, there was an instance right before my brother passed away. It was actually on Easter Sunday where he and I got into a huge argument in my mother's kitchen. We were nose to nose, really about to probably fist fight in front of my mother, which was terrible anyways, but we were just so angry at each other because there was a ton of stress going on in our family. And he and I said a bunch of terrible things to each other that day. And it was one of those moments where I left and I was so angry, and the whole ride home I was just super frustrated and mad at him for some choices he was making and the way he was handling certain situations. And honestly, when I look back on it, it was just the stress that I had, that I was dealing with, that I was pushing off on him, and vice versa. And that's just what siblings do sometimes. But that happened on a Sunday. 3 days later, my brother passed away. I never had an opportunity to tell him I was sorry for the things that I said to him. And that's something that haunted me for so long. But one thing that really helped me get past that, and it took a very long time, was I got to thinking about our relationship. And I was thinking that he and I had many moments, just like most brothers and sisters do, where we actually fight. We say things we shouldn't say, and eventually we laugh and get over it. But this moment really made me realize that you don't always have an opportunity to say you're sorry. So from that point on, I've really chosen to be super intentional about forgiveness in my life, whether it's, an ex-spouse or a family member or a friend or a coworker. I really don't let the day pass without apologizing. And that's really, really hard sometimes depending on the circumstance. But I don't want that moment to come where I don't have the opportunity to not forgive them. And the same thing comes with forgiving yourself as well too. I don't want to start a new day knowing that I haven't forgiven myself for something that I've done the prior day. So here are 5 tips to help with self-forgiveness. The first tip is to embrace guilt. It feels like a weird way to start the process of self-forgiveness, but it isn't. It's important to know that guilt has value, and self-forgiveness does not mean you will no longer feel remorse or guilt. You can forgive yourself, release the feelings of resentment and negative judgment while still having a healthy level of guilt that will stay with you. Tip number 2 is to consider the difference between guilt and shame. It's important to be aware of the feeling that you made a mistake or did something wrong, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. We all screw up. Sometimes those screw-ups are small, sometimes they're huge, sometimes they're imaginably devastating, but there's a distinct and important difference between doing a bad thing and being a bad person. It's important to consider if what you are feeling is guilt alone or has bled into shame. Research has shown that those who feel guilt rather than shame are less likely to make the same mistakes. Tip number 3 is sit with the discomfort. Guilt is a painful and unpleasant emotion, so no surprise our instinct can be to avoid it. The first step in working towards self-forgiveness is acknowledging exactly why we feel guilty for it and facing it directly. Tip number 4 is something that I have to do constantly. Consider if you are holding yourself to a different standard. Would you forgive a friend or family member in the same situation? Or would you tell them to forgive themselves? If so, consider why you are treating yourself differently than you would someone else. Why would you forgive that person and not yourself? And lastly, tip number 5 is to make amends. Now, sometimes there's someone who you need to ask forgiveness for who maybe is not here anymore. So the approach to that is typically have a symbolic moment of making amends, whether it's grabbing an empty chair, sitting in front of you, asking that person to forgive you. You need to make amends in order for you to forgive yourself. That's definitely one of the hardest parts of the process sometimes, is actually speaking those words out loud or going to someone and asking them to forgive you so you can forgive yourself. But it's something that I highly recommend if you have some sort of guilt or shame or something along those lines in your heart. So that's today's 1% moment of truth. I'd love to hear your feedback on the topic of forgiveness. So you can email me or just respond to one of our social media posts about maybe an instance where you've had to forgive someone. I'd love to hear your feedback. So let's talk about our guest today, Mr. Brian Kudler. Brian is the founder of the CSP Squad, which is the Cancer Support Project. And you can go to cspproject.com to find out more information about Brian and all the great things that he's done. But Brian is living with terminal cancer. And during our interview today, you're going to hear about all of the ups and downs with his diagnosis, how he's living right now, an extremely long period of time, a much longer period of time than he was originally supposed to live. But he knows that his intuition's kind of telling him that, he's getting closer and closer to that day. But I'm so proud of Brian for coming on the show and being a part of the 1% podcast and really having the courage and the authenticity to tell his raw story. So why don't you welcome our guest, Mr. Brian Kudler, founder of the CSP Project. Brian, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. Welcome to the 1% podcast. I've enjoyed talking to you. We've had a couple of conversations on the phone, and every time we talk, man, I feel like we always can go down like a rabbit hole and have like an hour conversation. So we'll keep that all clean for everybody today as we go in through the interview process and stuff. But I'm excited to have you on the show, man. Your story is very unique in a lot of ways because it's the type of story that people don't want to talk about, I think, in a lot of times. And I think it's great that you have a ton of courage to be able to come on the show and be able to talk about that today. So thanks again ahead of time for that. Why don't you start by telling everyone a little bit about yourself, like where you're from and what your diagnosis is right now and what you're doing for a living.
I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I live now in Austin, Texas. I moved here in the 90s, went into corporate America, did some schooling, went into culinary arts with a focus on more plant-based nutrition. This is in early 2000, before the big hype that we have today, using food as medicine, as basically how it's called now. I was running 2 business operations. We had a bakery. We did a weekly farmers market. I think we were in 4 farmers markets a week, and we were distributing a vegan cookie nationally.
Cool.
It was definitely a lot of fun. I enjoyed. I'm very entrepreneurial, which I still am. We were running our businesses and I decided to go for a checkup because I was kind of tired, but we were working like our Friday nights, we'd go into work at midnight. We wouldn't be done until 3 or 4 Saturday afternoon. So, some of that was like, well, this is not an easy job being a baker and trying to run businesses. Like it's hard, it takes a toll on you. So I went for just a random physical and it came out that I was anemic. And my dad died at 39. He was 39 when he died. I was 7, of colon cancer. And when I was telling the primary doctor that, he felt really uncomfortable about the fact that I was anemic. I was 36 at the time. And so he sent me to go in for a scope. And literally, as I don't know, you've gone, I'm sure, for scopes. When you wake up, you're still not coherent, but they give you your results. Well, mine was, you have thousands of polyps and you need to have your colon taken out because you're going to die. The disease that I have is familial adenoid polyposis, FAP for short. Yeah. There are a couple of different variations of how that disease expresses itself. Mine, I had thousands of polyps in my colon. I had a few up in my small intestine and a couple flat ones in my stomach. But I also had what's called an intra-abdominal soft tissue sarcoma, which they call a desmoid.
Mm-hmm.
And what FAP is, it's a mutation in your connective tissue. So your cells keep on replacing themselves. It's just a normal part of life. Unfortunately, with people with this mutation, they don't stop multiplying. They continue to multiply and grow. And you can have just this colon issue, which FAP is, where you have a colectomy and they give you ileostomy or a colostomy, and you deal with that for the rest of your life. There's another group of people that have what are called soft tissue sarcomas or desmoids, and they can be anywhere, your extremities, internal organs. They're not classified as a metastatic cancer, but they do invade your organs. They break bones because they're all connective tissue. Connective tissue is really strong, tacky kind of tissue. It can adhere to things, which is what has happened in my case. And there's also a smaller percentage, like I think it's 1 in 2 million, that have both of those combined, where you have the polyp syndrome and you have these desmoids. I have 2 desmoids intra-abdominally, and I didn't have my colon removed. I actually had 90% of it taken out, and they were able to stretch my small intestine down enough to reattach me. Because I was running a bakery, I was 36 years old, and it's like, I didn't want to live with a bag, because I was like, as weird as it sounds, it didn't seem sanitary to me to have an external evacuation system around baked goods.
Right.
So I was diagnosed at 36. And when I met with the surgeon and stuff, I didn't connect with him. And I had been doing some alternative stuff. Like I had an acupuncture that I used to see. I had herbalists. I really ate a very clean lifestyle, lived a very clean lifestyle. I didn't really have toxins in my home. I didn't use colognes or anything synthetic on my body. So I felt like I had a really good chance of not having to go down the road that from what little bit of research I could find in 2007 of what this would do and how this would come about. Unfortunately, 2008, when the economy was slowing down, my body was slowing down. I had already been diagnosed for 2 years and I was doing alternative stuff, and I was still sustaining a decent quality of life. I mean, I had ups and downs, but I was still primarily functional. Then we decided to close at the end of 2008, and I went back to school for another degree. I was going for social work because I knew that I had this illness, and I knew that I would have to figure out a way to navigate my life with this rare mutation that is terminal. Even with surgery, there are still too many variables. Just to explain, when you get cut, there are hormones that are released to help your body heal that cut. Same thing with a trauma. Well, those hormones are what engage and activate this mutation to grow and proliferate. So in 2008, I was living my life. I was back in school. I was jogging because I started listening to Oprah's journey in 93 of how she did a marathon and all the stuff that she struggled with. And I was like, that seems like something, a good goal to have besides school. I'm pretty goal oriented. So I was working on jogging and I was getting down to 7.5-minute miles, and I started having this excruciating pain in my abdomen. I wound up having to go to the ER and they did a CAT scan, and it came back that they believed that I had cancer. And I'm still kind of fuzzy because it was so many years ago if they were talking about the desmoid in my abdomen or if they were referring to a colon cancer. So fortunately, I'm from New York. I have family in New York, and my family, my mother, both her sisters, my father, one of my grandparents have all died from cancer. I've had a few cousins, but one thing we shared is they would go to Sloan Kettering for treatment because it was one of the best places in the world to go. They understand, they do a really good job of the patient experience, which is really difficult to manage. So I went there, found out that I had stage 2 colon cancer, and realized, okay, I have to do something. So they forwarded me to a surgeon, and he was giving me 3 options of one, either we can't do anything because of what they see in a CAT scan may not be real when they go in there, or we can give you, I think it was an ileostomy they were calling it, or we'll do a reattachment surgery. I had been jogging all this time. I was jogging up until the day before I went in for surgery. I had no idea what to expect when I woke up, and I wasn't really familiar with the medical system. Like, I had a primary doctor. That was the first time I'd seen a doctor probably in 5 or 6 years because I was in fairly good health. So I went in for surgery, woke up, found out that I was reattached, which was remarkable because I really don't feel that mentally I could have handled having an ileostomy. So we did that, and that gave me more time. Like, looking back now, that's all these interventions that I've done are just giving me more time. I worked with macrobiotic counselors. I did supplementation. I went back to jogging, yoga, school. I was commuting to college an hour each way, 4 days a week, and doing chemotherapy. And then my surgery was in 2010. By December, January 2010, 2011, I felt like I hit a brick wall. Like, my body just couldn't keep up anymore. I really had to modify my life. School went from going to school to finding a school that I could do distant learning. And in 2010, it was starting to be more options, but they were still very limited. So I was able to find a school where I could do most of my coursework online. And I went through chemo for a year and a half with, unfortunately, no positive results. I went to the ER and I found out that I had a partial obstruction. And I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and Sloan is in Manhattan. So I was transferred to Manhattan, and I was in the hospital for a week, and I had 5 different physicians and surgeons tell me there's nothing we can do.
Why was there nothing they could do?
Because of the way the desmoids in my abdomen, they can't remove it because it's attached to my bladder and my pancreas. Also, they don't radiate those areas, and there isn't a chemotherapy that works for this, fortunately. There are some treatments that I think people have had success with or have a decent life using these treatments continually. I didn't get that. I didn't experience any of that. I had a lot of issues with the side effects with the various NSAIDs that they give you and/or chemotherapy treatments. They basically told me to go talk to a bowel transplant surgeon. And mind you, I'm still very naturopath driven. So hearing like, you have to go meet a transplant doctor, like, that was never something I even thought would be a part of my discussion or life. So I met with 2 different surgeons who both felt they could do something. Unfortunately, it wouldn't really increase my time or my quality of life. And I'd have to be near a team of doctors for quite a number of years and have to be on anti-rejection drugs. And I, it wasn't what I was interested in. It didn't appeal to me.
I was going to ask you, what year did you have the bowel instruction?
It was the fall of 2014. I met with a surgeon at Mount Sinai who has dealt with people with this rare mutation and has performed bowel transplants. And I think I know the healing is at least a year. And typically what they like to do is take out your insides and everything. Like for me, they wanted to take out everything the desmoid touched. So half my pancreas, part of my bladder, what's left of my small intestine, and part of what was left of my large intestine, and I forget what percentage of my small intestine, which put me at risk for what's called small bowel disease. If they cut too much of your small bowel, you can't do absorption.
Right.
So, which means you have to live on TPN, and the success rate of TPN is not very good. For some reason, whatever the supplement that they give you, it damages the liver pretty rapidly. And they also try to do the surgeries back to back, where they'll take yours out and put a cadaver one in, and or a family member's part of a family member's. So these were all options we were looking at. And then it came down to, I would have to be living with 3 tubes, one for, liquid waste, one for solid waste. And I forget what the third one, I guess for nutrition, because I could eat, but it wouldn't go anywhere. There would be no absorption. And I would have to live like that for at least a year before I would be eligible for a cadaver bowel. And there was just too many risks involved for me. Like, I kind of have this philosophy, I want to die as whole as possible. So his prognosis at that time I met with him, I think January 2015. It was a really hard 2 months. Like, I was going to drop out of college. I was in my last semester because I couldn't handle every day. It was like, what am I going to do? This is not, there's no win-win on this one. So I decided that I didn't want to do that procedure. And he prognosed me that I would have about a year and a half left to live.
So you were told in 2014 you had about a year and a half left to live.
Yes.
Okay. So now we've got like a snapshot of your story as far as the desmoids, all the polyps, leading all the way up to the chemo, the radiation, to the surgery, now we're at the bowel obstruction period right here. And now you're given a year to a year and a half to live. And that's in 2014. When you got got that prognosis that, you only had, 12 to 18 months to live, what did you immediately start thinking about?
I realized I had to assess everything in my life. When I heard that I had a year and a half to live, I really had to assess, do I want to stay in New York? What do I want to do? Like, I'm a type A personality. Like, just because I have a terminal disease, that doesn't go away. I'm still a type A personality. I'm just better at managing it because of years of meditation and yoga. But I really had to figure out what is the priority? I had to get quiet and turn off all that noise and figure out what is the best solution for me. I had to make some really hard sacrifices to still have, to live from up until living today. Like, every day there's sacrifices I make because I still believe that I still got stuff to do. So for me, my marriage ended. I relocated back to Austin. I finished my degree before I left. I had graduated in June of 2015, worked on figuring out what was the next phase. Like, what is, in the last 4 or 5 months, I've really been focusing on my legacy because I had met a nutritionist in 2015 that gave me some supplements and some things to do because he could see the pain in my eyes and my body was cannibalizing itself. Part of this whole problem that I've had is I don't absorb nutrition very efficiently. It's very hard to when everything is so compressed and compacted and twisted. So when I found him, I started feeling much, much better. So in my mind, that year and a half wasn't relevant for me. And I understand where the doctors were coming from, because at that point in time, had nothing changed, I probably I wouldn't be here having this conversation with you today. But being able to change my entire life situation definitely played a role in my outcome of being here today, as well as, some of the things that I incorporate into my life every day. And like I said, a few months ago, I really started looking at my legacy, because I know I'm running out of time. I mean, I don't know how to say it. It's just a feeling you have that that clock is running out, and that's fine. That's, I've had more time. I've had more opportunities. I have done more things because of this situation. And that's when I started looking at what is missing and where can I fill in a gap, because I've always been an advocate. I've always advocated for myself. I've always advocated for underdogs. It's just who I am. I'm very vocal, and I have, it's being a New Yorker, that's who we are. So that's what pushed me into developing the CSP project, which is the Cancer Support Project, because I'm sure this, cancer is expensive.
Right.
Like for me, I mean, to be alive this many years and the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I have burned through, that doesn't get replenished because I haven't been able to consistently work in 10 years. I feel like that's my purpose, is to try to educate people and create resources, because there aren't a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of confusion out there with cancer and the various diseases.
Yeah. So what's unique about your story to me is you decided not to get the surgery for all the tubes. And basically since 2014, you really haven't had any kind of treatment, correct?
Yeah. I've been on palliative care.
And that's what's, to me, like, that's what's so different about your story in a lot of ways. Because a lot of people want, all the drugs, all the medicine, and you can do everything they possibly can think of, from Western medicine to try to get healed and all those things like that. But you decided to go the complete opposite route and go your own route. And here you are, have lived past that year and a half that you were given. And so every day for you, which is a very different way to wake up, every day for you is, you're not doing anything medically to stop the disease. So you're just, every day is like flipping a calendar in a way, as far as, the way you're living your life, the things that you're doing, and you're not, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow, no matter if we're perfectly healthy. But, for you, I think mentally that the clock's going a little faster than other people. And I don't know how to ask you this, but I'll just come out at you. How do you live like that every day? Like what is it? It's got to take its toll on you sometimes, that the mental side, the emotional side. Like how do you deal with that each day?
There are days that are really rough. Like there are days I'm like, how I ask myself, how do I get up? Why am I getting up? Because it's not just all of this craziness about not having time. There is I have chronic symptom management. It's weird. The eating is painful. Anything other than a clear liquid causes problems in my system. Unfortunately, I had to rely on, like I said, I've been in palliative care for a few years. So I do have opiates that I have to use. I don't like it because they come with their own side effects, but I'm very resilient. I grew up in a very violent environment. I learned how to be resilient. I learned how to be strong. I learned that whatever it is, there's still a way to enjoy or find happiness in the madness of the world. And, like today this is a prime example. Yesterday was a horrible day for me. I was in bed all day. I felt like crap. I spend a decent amount of time in bed now, which is very foreign to me. But like I have a beautiful home. I have a beautiful backyard that, I was able to put all these things in place that visually I'm seeing beauty. And it's those little things, my dogs, that's what keeps me going every day. My relationships, unfortunately, a lot of them, it's been hard on all of us for 11 years. I have friends that live 20 minutes away from me that I see maybe once a month, because for me, when I'm uncomfortable so much, I'm irritated all the time. I can't handle being around people because I don't want to lash out. I don't want to be irritable. I don't, but it's reality. I was supposed to meet two friends for lunch yesterday. And mind you, I go and, my housemate, she cooks up a storm. We're both, very trained in cooking. And I smell some things and I love it. And some things make me nauseous. But it's like, I still want to go out and see people. But like yesterday, it was a prime example. I have two friends that we were supposed to get together. They do some help with me on this project. And 3 hours before we were supposed to meet, I was like, guys, I can't. And that wears on your relationships. But I can't tell you what it is that gets me up every day. It's just who I am. I'm a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a survivor. I'm definitely a definition of resilience, but I've had access to resources that most people would never even think of using. I have a therapist. I've known her 12 years, 13 years. So I have people in my life that knew the Brian before this disease. And that's mainly what I have. I have very few friends after me being sick. I have a couple.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing that I still have those memories with those people of what I used to be able to do, for whatever, it's not sad or depressing for me. It's like, it makes me proud that I was able to do that and I've been able to survive. And yes, I didn't have to rely on the standard system to achieve it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people realize we have a say-so. Mine was different. I was terminal from the day that they found this. So what was the worst that was going to happen? I was going to die sooner. I wasn't going to gain anything. I wasn't going to lose anything either way.
Right.
So I don't know if everybody has that thought or feels that way. I mean, I did 5 different types of chemo. Worst mistake of my life, unfortunately. Really the worst. That more so than anything else is something I've never been able to come back from. I can deal with all the modifications I had to make when they reattached me and, eliminating total food groups. I can't eat meat. I can't eat chicken. Can't eat fish. Nothing like that, because all that can get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And if it gets stuck, there's no intervention for me. Like, that will kill me. So I was able to just do what I wanted, the way that I wanted. Like, I'm one of those difficult patients. I have an oncologist who's I've never had a doctor write up a letter stating that the interventions are worse than letting this person live out the rest of his life. And I don't see him anymore because there's no point. But we met about half a dozen times. Every interaction with him was very uncomfortable for me. And I could see it on his face in the interactions we had. Because I went to Sloan, I found a team that anywhere else in the world, this doesn't exist, because I'm 1 in 2 million people. And to be able to have a team from the get-go, mind you, I had to sit there and say no to surgery here. And I went, to other institutions, but I didn't feel comfortable until I was there. Because for me to do surgery was a huge thing, because I would have let myself try to heal alternatively, because I only had stage 2 colon cancer at the time. But something was like, no, we need to really address this. And, I was comfortable with the surgery option.
So you said you have good days and bad days. When you have your good days, what are 2 or 3 things that really bring you joy every day?
I live in Austin, and I don't know if you've ever visited. This is one of the most beautiful cities to be in. Being able to get out. Like, I have very small windows of maybe 4 hours in a day that I don't have a symptom to manage. So when those do happen, I'm out. I have a friend that owns a kombucha company. I go and hang out with her and the people there because I do some project work for them. I have 2 dogs. I have a car seat for them in my car. Taking them out, letting them get around town with me. Like, it's simple things like that. Being able to go to Starbucks and treat myself to whatever, because it's not going to kill me at this point,
Right.
So it's when people talk about the small little things, it really is the small little things. When I feel well enough, I get together with my friends. Either we meet here, I go to their house. I haven't traveled since June or July of last year. I used to like to go to the beach here. We're about 6 hours from the beach here, and I have friends that live pretty close to there. I used to go down there. One of the things about being disabled, you're retired.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as you have the resources, I used to go down there for a week, 2 weeks at a time, because I didn't have any commitments, which is not normal for people who live with cancer. Like, I'm not tied to doctors. I have a palliative care doctor I see once a month, and that's it, because doing it a different way didn't work for me. Being at the end of your life, for me, I want to be free. I don't want to be tied down. I don't want to have these commitments of going for blood work and going to see people that are going for infusions that look worse than I do. That really didn't jive with me. So lately it's been a lot of time in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Our weather's been pretty good. It's in the 50s today. Getting out there with the dogs, going grocery shopping, like that's being able to go to the grocery store and not be anxious or not feel like, oh my God, do I have a symptom I need to manage? Because I don't know how it is for you, but I need to always be near a restroom. I also have to consume at least a gallon of water a day because I deal with dehydration is a big problem. So being able to do those little things, like I used to enjoy going shopping. I can't really, clothes shopping and stuff like that. I'm not in the financial realm to be able to do that anymore. That's pretty much where I'm at. I mean, I am at the furthest point I feel to death in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I said, I've been homebound quite a lot, and not just homebound, in bed. It's the only place that I feel comfortable because of all the pain and difficulty I'm managing now that my illness has progressed so far. I think you and I were discussing it a little bit. Like, now I've got a bladder incontinence issue because of one of my tumors.
Right.
I have to go next week to see a surgeon that wants to look at debulking or a trial. And my palliative care doctor wants me to see this guy. And I'm not going to do anything. I mean, I already know this. I just want to get something that will help my bladder be able to work, hopefully a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't have a problem with dying. Like, my mind is still really strong. It's my body. This body is broken down tremendous. 70-80% of it is really gone from what it was. But not being comfortable, that's the hardest part of all this.
So what do you want your legacy to be? When people talk about you one day, what do you want people to say about Brian, just from a legacy standpoint?
That no wasn't in my vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I took chances because it was what was right for me. And I hope that people will, not that they do the same thing, but at least they have the awareness that there are different ways to look at this. I mean, we have to be honest. The medical system is still a business, just like everything else is. And it's up to us to figure out, and it's not easy because there's so much conflicting information out there. We have to be able to figure out what works for us, because what works for me may not work for you. What works for you may not work for, the person next door. We are all individuals. Our DNA is different. Our bodies react different ways to different things. Look, I've been alive longer than I'm supposed to.
Right.
Like, this is not, if I would have continued to do chemotherapy, I don't think you and I would be having this conversation. And I'm not saying that that's not whatever people's choice is. Just be aware that there are there's other options out there. when you're sick, you need to be able to open your mind up to all possibilities, and try not to narrow them down, because you're going to hear a lot of noise from a lot of different areas.
Yeah, that's I know that's a tough question to kind of think about, but that's honestly that no matter when our time is, I think that's something we should be thinking about every day is how do we want our legacy to be once we're gone. And again, like, I know this can be a depressing conversation in a way, like to think, or for people listening right now, you think, this is it's a tough
God,
thing.
I hope not. This shouldn't be a depressing conversation. Like, we need to be real.
Yeah.
Like on the CSP squad, like I put up a thing that I think I got from Cancer Well Mag on Instagram is, we whisper about cancer.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be screaming about it.
Saying like that's, some people could conceive it as depressing, but it's not, because what you're saying is so true to the way we should all live our lives every day. And, unfortunately, you still have cancer and stuff. There's people that get it and it goes away. And there's people that get it and it comes back. And some people, the chemo just doesn't work. But, regardless of, how long we have to live, whether it's 10 years or 20 years or 10 days kind of thing, we need to be focused on what we can do each day to live our life more intentional. Whether it's the relationships that we have, whether it's, our thought process. And this body is only temporary. It's not meant to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Some people's doesn't last as long as others, and doesn't mean anything's wrong. You're not less of a person if your body doesn't last as long. It's one of those things where we're all given a finite amount of time, and we're only responsible with what we have. And if someone's time is shorter than ours, then they're just as responsible as we are if you live a lot longer. And so, with you each day, and as you progress on further, and as it's speeding up for you, like you said earlier, you feel like you're closer to death than you ever have been in your entire life. You're kind of getting that almost like sixth sense in a way that it could possibly be a little closer than it was previously. When you look at your relationships with other people, are there any relationships out there that you may feel, or you feel obligated to, or do you feel like you want to patch up, or is there any forgiveness out there that you feel like that needs to have happen, or anything along those lines for you?
Well, what's interesting is my marriage didn't end the best way.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last few weeks, the love for each other it's not the lack of love that ended this marriage. It was, I have a terminal illness. I'm going to college. My spouse was was in medical school. We were both in our 40s. It was literally just an implosion because of everything else that was going on around us. I'm grateful that we were able to talk about it recently, and just be grateful that it ended. We still care about each other, and we don't have any hard feelings about it. One of the things that I hope people take from this is, if you are married, I think the average that statistically 50% of marriages will end when it comes to a chronic illness. From personal experience, if you love that person, make that the priority. The rest of it doesn't matter. If that person is the one that you love, and you can see the rest of you dying with that person, then that's where your energy needs to go, because it can obliterate a marriage. That's
a commitment, you've said you were going to stick in for better, for worse, and sickness and health and things like that. And some people aren't as good as holding up commitments as other people, but it's one of those things. And again, like I'm just as guilty myself. I didn't hold up my end of the bargain, so I'm not judging anybody by any means, because I've been there myself. Having a chance to do it over again, it's one of those things where, for me, like, I know my commitment now is something that I'll never break, I would say. And I got a second chance.
Right.
And that was something that was important to me, because for me, that was disappointing that I got into the wrong relationship at first. And then, something a part of that I probably should never been a part of in the beginning. And then it, ending it and everything else. But that's a question I like to ask people, the forgiveness question, because sometimes as parents, sometimes it's a former spouse. Sometimes it's a best friend. But you said something in the very beginning about wanting to be buried as whole as possible, right? And like not having all your organs removed and things like that and stuff. And I think, if we're being buried with a tremendous amount of unforgiveness or anger or things like that, our soul is heavy with that. And it's one of those things that, we don't have to be buried with, I guess, in a way. And sometimes that's the hardest part, is making that phone call or whatever else, and again, you don't have to have terminal cancer to make that call. But leaving this world without that, I think, is definitely a better thing. Like carrying that with you is it's not a good thing, because, and I say this because I've had a family member, like a brother of mine, pass away very unexpectedly and to suicide. And once he was gone, there's things I couldn't say I was sorry for, you know what I mean? And so it definitely, it makes me think about things a lot differently. And going back even further, like there was some unforgiveness with other people in my family and stuff like that. And I know that I had to get rid of that. Like I had to get rid of that anger and everything I had held towards people. And that's why I was just curious about what your perspective was. Like, as things are speeding along for you, if there's any areas in your life that you feel like maybe you want to hurry up and kind of get ready, or things you want to let go of.
Well, like my siblings, I have 3 siblings, or technically I have 4. We have a half sister that we know each other. We've never really hung around each other. We have the same dad, different mothers. But I have 3 brothers, and 2 are in New York. 1 is in California. And like, I'm going to see the surgeon next week. My older brother's coming, and we're all very independent. And it was really interesting because my brother was like, if you need anything, let me know. And, people always say that. And normally I'm like, I can handle this, which I can. I've gone to these appointments before. Like I don't think anything's going to top going and meeting with a bowel transplant surgeon. Like, I think that's the Eiffel Tower of my life. So, but I felt it was really important for my relationship with my older brother. It was like, you know what, you do need to come here, because he wasn't able to be a part of my diagnosis because I was in New York. My younger brothers were there. So it was like the 3 of us took care of it with, and my family up there. Also within the last year, my relationships with all of my siblings, we transcended something that is really profound, because the hostile environment we grew up in, we knew we loved each other and we were always important to each other, but we weren't able to really show up for each other. Mm. And in the last few, definitely the last year, but in the last couple of years, especially my younger brothers, we have really worked on all showing up for each other. I do believe that a lot of our friendships do change over the course of our lives. Mm-hmm. We are different people at different stages. I've definitely had to do a lot of growing, because this does, what I deal with. Are there days that I'm bitter? Yeah. But there's days that I'm not bitter, and, which is better than being bitter every day, right? Because I think it's just human nature.
Yeah.
So, but your siblings, if you can mend those relationships, at least for me, that is the best gift of all. Mm-hmm. Because we had really crazy upbringing, and one thing that never broke was the love that we had for each other. We may not have been in each other's lives as much as we wanted to, like we are now, but we definitely, that's the greatest gift out of all this, because I think that was one of the things that I yearned for. Like, my mother died in 2006 of mesothelioma. As horrible as it sounds, her death was the best thing for me to release so much. Like, you talk about animosity and anger and all that. Her passing let me achieve that. Mm-hmm. And it freed up space to really look at, okay, I have siblings that I care about. We care about each other. We have adult conversations. We go to each other for advice or for help. And that's not something we grew up with. My parents, my dad didn't have any siblings. My mother, her and her siblings were estranged most of their adult lives. So we don't have drama. It's amazing. Like, we don't have dysfunction. We have pretty decent interactions, conversations. We all respect who we are. We may not agree with the way we do things, but we don't really tell the other one what to do, like, which is kind of a beautiful thing, considering we grew up in a world where everything was judged. That makes all this worth it.
Yeah. I know, I've had this discussion before, the last phone call we had. We talked about religion a lot for a while, and faith and things like that and stuff. I was actually talking to one of my parents the other day, and I was telling them about you and the conversation and stuff that we had. Like, you're figuring stuff out in different ways and things like that. And there's things that you've tried and stuff before, and your upbringing was very different, compared to the way things are now and stuff like that. So, man, I just want to keep challenging and encouraging you to keep seeking the truth and everything else, and find out what, find your direction when it comes to all that stuff as well too, because we can be sick as sick can be in those depressing, sad days and everything else. And you don't have to feel good to have like peace, I would say. And that's definitely something that, you and I continue to talk about offline and things like that and stuff too. But just having peace, man, peace when things are just wild and crazy and bad and don't look like they're going to turn out great and everything else. There's a lot of peace that kind of comes with that. I want to end our interview talking about your the CSP project, because I think that's really cool. And by the way, I'm still waiting for you to email me, but mail me some of your pastries over there. I've been checking the mail every day, and I'm getting disappointed. So I'm joking, but tell everybody a little bit about your the CSP Squad. I know you have a website called cspsquad.com, and what you guys are a part of.
Okay, basically, like I mentioned, the resources and things that I've had exposure to, the knowledge, the way that I live, like, this took me years to cultivate. But I was able, for whatever divine intervention, whatever you want to call it, I was definitely put on a path to learn all this, because I do believe this directly related to how long I've lived and how well I've lived. But there's also a hard fact with an illness. There's a financial burden that if you don't have money coming in, enough money coming in, I don't know, when it comes to an illness, it would be, especially cancer, like they're talking, I think 42% of people in the first 2 years can be bankrupt.
Yeah.
Like, there's something wrong when everything you've worked for to that point and going forward, depending upon what your outcome is going to be, is based on how much money you have. There's some resources out there. I know there's a lot of resources for medication and for co-pays and different things like that, and there's even, trials for future medications that might be less toxic, but there's millions of us that are living every day that can barely survive. And that is more damaging. They call it financial insecurity. That is more damaging than anything else in your life. Because if you can't afford to survive, mentally, you're going to start questioning, why am I alive? Secondly, it's going to add so much more stress just in terms of how you're going to handle paying your bills. You're trying to fight for your life. And unfortunately, you have to fight for income as well. I was 36. We're getting people younger and younger being diagnosed with cancer, which means there's going to be less and less people that have access to long-term resources,
right,
to support them through their treatments. Like, my philosophy is, like, my generation, it was about save for retirement. I'm like, no. We really need to be saving for a chronic disease. And in the event that you don't get one, then there's your retirement.
Right.
Because it is happening to people in their 20s, in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, cancer in large part was people much older. at least 40, late 40s, 50s. That's not happening anymore. Look, we have, of course we have children that are going through chemo, going through cancer as well. So the CSP squad, basically, I live on, and I burned through 150, 200,000 in the last 24 months. I struggle every month to support myself, to get my bills paid and deal with the stress of it and deal with the stress of my illness. I've had to stop a lot of the alternative stuff that I was doing that kept me going, because I don't have the resources anymore. I don't want people to be in that situation anymore. Like, I want to be able to help out, because I feel like that, no matter what other policies or political or capitalistic economic things that we have going on, people still need to be able to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we're all seeing it. Social Security, disability is, if you're eligible for it, it's not enough to even cover basic expenses. Like, there's some information on my website about it. I want to change that. I want people to be able to, I would like the CSP squad, provided I live long enough, to be able to help people that need money for day-to-day living. And right now it's a cspsquad.com, because I don't believe in charity. So for me, it's like, okay, you buy these products because I'm a baker. It's what I love doing. It's helped me when my stress is really high. Like, I tell everybody, my friends worry when I'm not in the kitchen baking, because it means I'm not doing well, because that is one of my therapies. What I've decided to do was, I've created a traditional brioche bun that I stuff with either a cannoli filling, which is basically lots of powdered sugar and ricotta cheese,
Right,
and some lemon zest, or a potato and chocolate chip cookie in the middle. Or, I'm from New York, I love crumb cake. Well, I decided to turn it into a cookie and put that inside the brioche. And so there's like 3 different ones you can get. And they come in pairs of 2s, and they're decorated on top. And people that go to the website, they'll see them. But like, there's an exchange that's happening. Yes, you're helping. Right now, it's helping me survive. The goal is to help more people survive by buying something.
yeah.
And they're getting, you're getting I forget what the little cute tagline I have, but basically it's like, you're buying, the buns come in sets of 2. So you get to share them, and your proceeds are sharing somebody else's life.
Yeah.
And helping them with their day-to-day life to make it a little bit better.
Look, man, I'm ready to order some. You started talking about all that again since the last time we talked about it. I'm ready to order some. So you just let me know whenever it's ready to order, and I'll put a note out to everyone listening to the show and everything. I know you got us tagged on your website and stuff as well.
Right.
But I'll let everyone know about your baked goods, man. You start shipping those things out, and we'll be enjoying them, and we'll be helping support you and the other people that are part of the Cancer Support Project. Well, Brian, man, I know we could talk forever, and we'll keep talking. I'm just really thankful. I'm really thankful to have you in my life. Since the first time we talked on the phone, I just knew that I knew personally that God put us together, and to have a lot of discussions and to get to know each other, and to have these discussions and talk about all these different things that we chat about each time. And each time I learn something more about you, it makes me appreciate you more, and appreciate what you're doing. And I know you don't have it easy by any means whatsoever, but I'm thankful that you get up every day and make the effort, because it doesn't go unnoticed for a lot of people probably. And I'm not, when you're irritated and people don't want to be around you because you're all mad and everything else, I'm sure you bring a lot of joy to people's life, and they just don't tell you when you're acting like that. But anyways, I want to be the one to tell you for everybody else. So I'm going to put some links to the cspsquad.com in our show notes so people can check out all the baked goods and stuff that you have online and read more about the project. And you know what? If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you? I know you're on Instagram.
I'm on Instagram. It's CSP Squad. Facebook, there's a CSP Squad. If you go to the website, there is a form
All right.
I wanted to say, hey, I really appreciate you doing this. Like I've been doing this for, I've been dealing with this for 11 years, and it's something that was missing in my life, and I'm so glad that you're doing it, because I think this is really important. People need to hear real life.
Thank you. That means a million different things to me to hear you say that. I'm glad you found the show. I'm glad it's been helpful for you in your life and stuff. And, people would rather talk to somebody who's always real than someone who's always right. And so I really try to bring people the realest, your versions of the story. Each person has a different version and different thing. I really like to bring people different versions so they can pick and choose what, different things from each podcast, but what works for them. And just letting you know that you're not alone. When those days when you feel really alone, you're not. That we're all here to support you. And, we're all, cheering for you, and we're all happy that you could, had the courage to share your story and share all these moments with us and stuff. So what I'll do is I'll keep everyone posted on you as far as the way things go. And like I said, man, quit holding out on those sweets over there.
I need to get back to baking.
Yeah, get to the kitchen and get going. So, Brian, man, it was nice talking to you, buddy. And we'll be in touch with you really soon, okay?
All right, take care.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.